In chapter two, we're going to be having an introduction to cost data. Namely, we're going to be reviewing some different cost terminology that gets used, and we're going to be talking about places in your company's system where you can find the data you need to properly cost a component of your business. So, what is a cost? By definition, it is the monetary value of the resource used or sacrificed to achieve a certain objective. It's the cost of something. What is that something? It could be a lot of different things. Easiest way to wrap your head around it is think of a particular product. We'll go with the first bullet there. A Cybertruck made by Tesla. What costs go in there? Well, the cost of acquiring materials that get used in production, the cost of labor to produce those goods, the cost of research and development to design the truck, the cost of an advertising campaign to promote the truck, the cost of commissions on the salespeople that sell the truck. All of those things are costs of that Cybertruck. And same is true for Apple with an iPhone. Those are cost objects, but a cost object doesn't necessarily need to be a specific product. It can be any component of your business that you can break down into costs that go to that particular component, like divisions. Nike used to make golf clubs back in the day. They don't anymore, but they did for years and years and years. And at the time, they had a golf division. So all of the unique costs of making golf stuff would have been assigned to the golf division. Businesses have different departments. Walmart has tons of different departments in there. They're trying to figure out the cost of the electronics department versus the food area versus customer service. All of those things would be able to have cost tracked directly to them. They're a cost object as well. So things can be very large in scale as a cost object, but they can be very granular, which basically means detailed as well. And that's where the specific products come in, unique services you provide to people, or even the particular costs that you have to incur to have a customer that you do repeated business with. All of those could be considered cost objects. When costs are recorded on your books, they come in a couple of different natures. The first one is direct costs, and they are costs that are easy to trace to an individual cost object. And the big two are your direct materials and your direct labor if you're a manufacturing company. If you're making a Cybertruck, you know exactly how much steel and rivets and everyone has multiple breaks on it. Like the exact components it takes to make one of those. So you can trace the cost of materials needed to make that Cybertruck very easily to that particular Cybertruck, that cost object. Direct labor, same thing. When people are working on stuff, you know what particular units they're working on or what job they're doing as their job function at the time. And you can assign labor costs of employees directly involved in the manufacturing process to whatever they're manufacturing. So direct costs are things that are easily traceable to a specific cost object. The opposite of that is indirect costs. Those are costs which you can't clearly trace to any one particular cost object, most likely because they are actually shared by multiple cost objects. If you have a production facility, you're not making just one product in that production facility. You're probably making a magnitude of different products. Apple doesn't make just, iPhone 15s in one place. They make all of the different brands of iPhones, all of their AirPods, all of their iPads, probably in the same manufacturing facility. And they have to heat that manufacturing facility. So the cost of heating their production facility is an indirect cost because it's not directly tied to any one given cost object. It's shared by all cost objects. And manufacturing overhead is probably the most common pool that they have for indirect costs. Is exactly what I just mentioned. Shared costs in the manufacturing process that are necessary to pay to produce multiple different product lines or cost objects. And cost allocation is the process of estimating how much these indirect costs are going to be and the methodology for assigning those indirect costs to the specific cost objects that they benefit. So, what are some other examples of direct costs? They call it inbound and outbound logistics. Let's make it less crazy terms. Receiving and shipping. If you are going to buy materials and have them taken off whatever truck delivered to you, pay the people to do so, and put it into your warehouse, those are all receiving costs. But you know what you're buying the materials for, so you can assign those receiving costs to that cost object. And when you finish manufacturing a good and you need to ship it out to its end user, whoever's going to sell it to you, or maybe directly to the customer, you know exactly what you're selling. You can assign those shipping costs to that cost object. Operations, the manufacturing process, we just talked about that. There's a bunch of costs, materials, and labor that go in there that you can assign directly. If you're going to market a particular product, you're usually making a commercial or making YouTube ads or whatever for that one product itself. So if you have a tailor-made advertising campaign for a specific cost object, you should assign that cost to the cost object. Sales activities, think of commissions is the easy one to think about that. When you sell something, you have to pay your salesperson a bonus for effectively selling your product. Well, you know what product they sold, so you can assign the sales commission to that particular cost object. Same is true for service. What would be indirect cost on top of the stuff I've been talking about? Supervisor salaries. They walk around the whole facility. That's a cost that is shared by a bunch of different products, a bunch of different cost objects. Quality control costs, insurance costs, and the depreciation on manufacturing equipment would all meet these same criteria because they're all costs that help benefit multiple different products. So, what we need to do at the end of the period is figure out some way to get those indirect costs into our cost objects because we can't just not have, they are necessary to make those things. If you're trying to figure out what the true cost of producing a Cybertruck or the true cost of producing an iPhone is, you're not getting the true cost if you're not accounting for your indirect costs. So, you need some methodology to do so. And it's not the easiest thing because in a lot of instances, one of two situations occurs. Either you lack the technical ability to trace it directly to the cost object. There's just no possible way that you can do that. If you have a production supervisor who's walking around the floor of a facility where literally hundreds of different projects are made, you can't reasonably ask that person to like keep a log of how many minutes a day they spend overseeing or supervising the production of one product versus the other. That's just, it's not technically feasible to do. So that is troublesome. You can't have a completely, absolutely correct and fair way to assign that supervisor's cost amongst all of the different products. Sometimes, theoretically, there is a way to do so, but the cost of actually figuring out how to trace those costs accurately, there's no benefit. It's not economically feasible. For example, you have a bunch of different machines that use electricity in that same facility that makes 100 different products. You could theoretically put a meter on the side of each machine to see how much electricity that it's used during the process, and then every time somebody's making one particular product in there, go read the meter, check it out, figure out how many kilowatt hours or whatever you put on it while you were producing that product, and then just keep tracking it that way. But then you gotta pay to put a meter on every single machine that you have in your facility. And not only that, you have to probably hook it up to a computer somewhere where it can record that information in a feasible way for you as you're going through the process. That is a whole bunch of costs to outlay to have a system in place to track costs when the benefit of it really isn't there. Like, what's there's not enough benefit in having that more perfect information when it comes at such a cost to your business's profitability. So there's no economically feasible way to assign out the electricity costs that go into production because you'd have to pay a fortune to do so, and it's just not worth it. So what do you do in this instance? And in all instances, you cost accumulate. You just keep recording your costs, paid this much on materials, paid this much for labor, incurred this much rent, got it, paid them this much in sales commission, on and on and on. You just accumulate all of those costs onto your books, and then at some point you're going to assign those costs from your books to the particular cost objects that they went into. If they're direct costs, it's easy. They're traceable to a particular object. So if you paid a cost for a certain material and you know that material is used in cost object A, you just assign it right to cost object A. But for indirect costs, you don't have that way to do it. So you need some kind of methodical system to be able to take all of those indirect costs out of the pool and spread them fairly amongst all the different things they benefited, and they call that allocation. So here, what costs would go into the Cybertruck? Well, I was talking about a few slides ago. We have some direct costs, direct materials, direct labor, sales commissions. All of those we can easily trace to each Cybertruck. You pay X amount for each of the materials that go in each unit. Each unit takes a certain amount of labor cost to produce, and you pay your sales staff a certain commission on every Cybertruck sold. You can directly trace that. There's the bunch of indirect costs that go into production supervisor The quality control costs, QC, people looking it over and making sure the truck's not going to explode once you sell it to somebody else. Cost of insuring the plant, the cost of research and development, the depreciation of the machines. Tesla makes more than just the Cybertruck. They make Model 3s and Model X's, etc. So those costs are shared amongst all of the different products. You would allocate based on some kind of estimated cost in here, those costs to that particular cost object. So costs will be direct or indirect in nature, but they will also be variable, fixed, or mixed in nature. And what's the difference between these three? Variable costs change as something increases, usually production. So raw materials, the more goods you make, the more you pay in materials. That is a variable cost because your total material cost varies based upon your production. And the same is true for sales commissions. You got to pay more of those, the more units that you sell, and even some things that are indirect. For manufacturing supplies, think about like WD-40 or some kind of lubricant for the machines that you're using to produce goods. The more stuff that you make in those machines, the more you have to pay for that. But no one's keeping track of how many milliliters of lubricant went into the machine each time you made a particular product. Just that cost and totals indirect. So you can't trace it, but while it's indirect, it is still variable because it's going to go up or down depending on your level of production. Fixed costs, they don't change based upon your level of production. Your rent is your rent. It doesn't matter how many units that you make. Some forms of depreciation, straight line namely, would fit this same scale. You've got a amount of depreciation you're going to record during the period, and that's what it is. If you're not, scaling depreciation based upon your units of production, you're just recording it straight line or double straight line. It's a fixed amount every period, regardless of how many units you actually make. So some costs are just fixed in nature, but some costs have a fixed component and they have a variable component. They are mixed costs. Think about utilities like your utilities as a whole, and one of them is the cost of the internet. Well, the price of your internet in the facility doesn't go up or down depending on how many units you produce. It's just a fixed amount that they tell you how much you have to pay every month. But other stuff like electricity will go up or down depending on how many units you produce. So your utilities as a whole are mixed. Some utilities are fixed in nature, while other utilities are variable in nature. Credit card fees, same basic concept. Most credit cards will require you to pay, most high-end business cards, I should say, will require you to pay an annual fee for every user of the company card. But also, you get hit with that credit card processing fee every time a transaction happens. So that annual fee doesn't change depending on how much you use your credit card, but your overall total credit card fees that you have to have will go up or down depending on how much that card gets used. They have mobile phone in here as the third one, and I actually disagree with that, but I think I know their theory behind it. I think what they're saying is you pay a flat monthly fee for your phone, and then if you have overages in minutes or overages in data use, it will cause your those two costs to be variable depending on how many minutes you talked or how much data you use during the period. And to that, I say if you are a big company and you don't have unlimited data, and unlimited minutes on every single phone that you give to your employees, you're crazy. Mobile phone should be a fixed cost, but McGraw-Hill seems to think that they are a mixed cost. So that is another delineation that you can have for the different type of costs. And the last one is whether something is a product cost or a or a product cost or a period cost. What are product costs? Product costs are the costs incurred directly to make products. They are the cost of your materials, they are costs of your labor, and there are any indirect costs, your manufacturing overhead, if you will, that goes directly into the manufacturing process. And you can even further break that down into prime costs and conversion costs. Prime costs are the things you have to have beforehand before you can even start making products. They are the things like the direct materials needed to make that product, and somebody skilled that knows how to do it, the direct labor there to start it up. So materials and labor count as prime costs. For conversion costs, those are the costs that turn all of those raw materials into an actual finished product that you can sell. Well, those are the labor costs as well that you incur during the process and all the overhead costs that go with it. So labor actually counts for both, whereas material is only a prime cost and manufacturing overhead is only a conversion cost. And a rule of thumb when you're trying to figure out is something a product cost or not, If it happens at the manufacturing facility, 99 point whatever percent of the time, it's going to be considered a product cost. That's important because product costs don't get expensed at the time that they are incurred. I call them inventoriable costs. They have to have their costs capitalized or assigned to inventory as you're making it. So if you pay an employee that's making stuff, you don't record that employee's salary as a salaries expense at the time you pay them. You actually take that salaries expense and you put it into the value of your inventory as you're constructing it. So when do you expense all of these inventoriable product costs? When you actually sell the goods and they get expensed via cost of goods sold. So if some cost is incurred at the manufacturing facility, you'll never expense it at the time that's incurred. It's going to flow through your inventory and you record the expense on it if and only if you sell the product that it went into making. The opposite of that is period costs. These are costs that have nothing to do with the production of products. These are your administrative costs, your selling costs, and some other general costs in here. And any cost that you wouldn't consider a product cost by nature has to be a period cost. It's got to be one or the other. And period costs, you don't put in inventory. Those get expensed at the time they're incurred. So if you are paying your CEO salary, since that nice lady will say in this case isn't actually in their manufacturing goods, you expense the CEO's salary at the time that it happens. Whereas if you have a line worker who's on the production line making stuff, they are making the goods. That salary would have to go through inventory first. So why is it important to do this? Well, you're trying to figure out what the costs of your goods are. And the cost of your goods should be the cost that could be avoided for the most part if you don't make the goods. You can't avoid that CEO salary if you don't make a particular good in this case. So it doesn't make sense to assign the CEO salary to a particular good. It's not a necessary cost incurred to make that particular cost object. And the thought process that Gap has behind this too is these costs that you incur aren't expenditures that are happening at the time. They're necessary costs to produce an asset that will provide you future benefit. What is that asset that you are producing that those costs are going to get capitalized to? Your inventory. So overall here we have direct materials. We know direct materials to be a prime cost. They're going to be variable in nature because the more that you make, the more direct materials that you use. And they're direct because you know exactly what amount of materials go into a cost object that you are producing, and therefore they can be traced. For direct labor, it is both a prime cost and a conversion cost, but it is still variable. It's still direct, and therefore, because it's a direct cost, direct labor cost can be traced right to the cost object of the product that the laborer is making, or the service that the laborer is doing, or whatever. Manufacturing overhead, that is a conversion cost. Some components of manufacturing overhead are variable, while some components of manufacturing overhead are fixed, like your factory rent. Well, both of these, all these things we have here, are indirect labor, which would be like our custodial staff, regular supplies you can't keep track of, like glue, your electricity, etc. And your rent on this thing. All of these are necessary costs for production. They go into the thing, but you're not going to trace them. They're all indirect costs. So these can't be traced directly. They have to be allocated amongst the different cost objects that they jointly help produce. So, all in all, if you are a manager working at a company, you definitely want to keep track of your costs, not for any gap filing reasons, though that's important, but because it helps you make the best decisions on things. It helps you determine what activities you want to undertake by understanding their true costs. So, in summary, you should know that if you are going to up production of a particular good, all variable costs associated with that are going to go up and they're going to change in proportion to the amount of the good that you make. And these variable costs will stay constant within what they call the relevant range. So each, I don't know, Cybertruck takes $6,000 in material. Well, you know that you're going to have to pay an additional $6,000 for each and every Cybertruck that you make. Fixed costs, however, they're constant. And those fixed costs will be constant the whole way through. And now it's more of a matter of getting your money's worth. Well, if you pay $20,000 a month in rent and you only make one Cybertruck, well, now that Cybertruck costs you $20,000 in rent to make. But if you pay $20,000 a month to make 20 Cybertrucks and you spread it out evenly, now each Cybertruck only costs you $1,000 in rent to make. So the fixed cost per unit decreases the more units that you make within the relevant range, which means you want to optimize the amount of production that you can have at your facility to spread to get your money's worth, get the most bang for your buck, and spread that fixed cost as thinly as you can across all of the different products that get made during the period because it reduces your overall cost per product.